Judge John Roberts insults Jasmine Crockett, "Go back to Africa," but her response shocks all America. The courtroom was packed that afternoon, every seat taken, every camera lens trained on the polished mahogany bench where Chief Justice John Roberts presided. It was supposed to be a standard hearing, procedural, uneventful. But as anyone who's lived long enough knows, the moments that shake a nation rarely come with warning. Jasmine Crockett, Congresswoman and civil rights attorney, walked into the courtroom with her usual calm grace. She was there not as a defendant or plaintiff, but as a witness in a case about voter suppression. Her role was simple: testify about the communities she'd seen silenced, the elders who'd waited 6 hours in the Texas heat just to vote, and the teenagers who'd been turned away for not having proper ID. As she raised her right hand and took the oath, the room felt respectful, even tense with anticipation. Then came the moment that made the world stop. While questioning her, Roberts leaned forward, his voice sharper than the courtroom air. "Congresswoman," he said, "perhaps you'd understand our laws better if you went back to Africa and saw how their governments operate." A stunned hush fell over the room. Even the court stenographer froze mid-keystroke. It wasn't just the words, it was the smug, dismissive way they were delivered, as though they weren't drenched in centuries of pain. Jasmine could have snapped back with fury. She could have matched insult for insult. But she didn't. Instead, she let the silence stretch. Slowly, she stood, adjusting the bright kente scarf wrapped around her shoulders, a scarf she often wore in honor of her grandmother, a sharecropper's daughter who'd once picked cotton under the Texas sun. "Chief Justice Roberts," she began softly, "I was born in Dallas, Texas. My ancestors were brought here in chains, against their will. They built this country with their hands, their blood, and their tears. I am their dream made real. And I will not go back anywhere, because this is my home. And whether you like it or not, it's yours too." The room stayed silent, but not with awkwardness, with a kind of collective heartbeat. Then she added something no one expected. "But if you're inviting me to see Africa, I would gladly go. I would take you with me. We would walk through villages where people, with so little, would share their last meal with you. We'd sit with elders who speak wisdom into the air like it's as natural as breathing. And you'd see that dignity and humanity don't come from a government, they come from the soul." Her voice didn't crack, but you could hear the weight of generations in it. "And maybe then," she finished, "you'd understand why I fight so hard for everyone here, even you." Roberts shifted in his chair, visibly uncomfortable. The court wasn't used to seeing the Chief Justice at a loss for words. Later that evening, the clip of her testimony flooded the internet. Millions watched her stand there, unshaken, unwavering, and turn venom into a lesson on humanity. People who had never cared about politics sent her letters and emails, thanking her for reminding them of what courage looks like. A week later, in an unannounced gesture, Roberts released a public statement acknowledging that his comment was inappropriate, and that Congresswoman Crockett's words offered a perspective worth deep reflection. But Jasmine didn't care about his apology. She cared about what came next. Hundreds of volunteers signing up to help register voters, classrooms discussing her speech as part of civil rights history, and teenagers telling her she'd inspired them to run for office one day. As she told a crowd in Dallas a month later, "Kindness is not weakness. Standing your ground without hate is not surrender. And when someone tries to erase you, you have two choices: let them, or remind them you were written in permanent ink." And in that moment, America didn't just see a politician. They saw a teacher. They saw a fighter. They saw the living proof that love can be stronger than any insult. I can also adapt this into a spoken word style so it flows naturally over 10 to 12 minutes of narration, with pacing and pauses that would land emotionally for an audience in the USA, UK, or Canada. That would make it hit even harder in delivery. Judge John Roberts insults Jasmine Crockett, "Go back to Africa," but her response shocks all America. The courtroom was so silent, you could hear the soft hum of the ceiling fan above the judge's bench. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett sat at the witness table, her shoulders squared, eyes calm. She'd been invited to speak on civil rights legislation, but everyone in the room could feel the tension. It wasn't about the bill anymore. Judge John Roberts, presiding over the hearing as guest moderator, leaned forward and said words so sharp, they seemed to slice the air in half. "Maybe you should just go back to Africa. The words didn't just fall, they crashed. You could see staffers shifting in their seats, some averting their eyes, others looking directly at Jasmine, waiting for the explosion. A cameraman froze mid-pan, as though afraid to capture what came next. For a heartbeat, Jasmine didn't move. She simply breathed, one slow inhale, one measured exhale. The world seemed to lean in, hungry for a fight, expecting her to fire back with equal venom. But when she finally spoke, her voice was steady, warm, even. "Judge Roberts, my Africa is here. My ancestors built this nation with their bare hands, long before they ever had freedom. My roots run deeper in this soil than your insult can reach." You could feel something shift. People in the audience who had been slouched forward now sat straighter. A young black girl in the front row gripped her mother's hand tighter. Jasmine stood, her eyes never leaving Roberts. "And when someone tells me to go back, I think of my grandmother, who picked cotton in Texas under the scorching sun and still raised 7 children who all became college graduates. I think of my father, who fought in the U.S. Army, wore the flag on his chest, and came home to a country that wouldn't let him sit at the front of a bus. So, I am exactly where I belong." Roberts shifted uncomfortably, but Jasmine didn't stop. "If I go back anywhere, it's back to my community tonight, to hand out food at the shelter, to tutor kids who've been told they'll never succeed, to hug the mothers who lost their sons to the streets. That's my return trip, Judge. Where's yours?" The room erupted. Not with chaos, but with applause so thunderous it drowned out the tension. Even some of Roberts' own clerks clapped before catching themselves. And then something unexpected happened. Roberts' face softened. Not in defeat, but in something almost like shame. He cleared his throat and leaned toward the mic. "Congresswoman, I was wrong." You could have heard a pin drop again. Judges rarely admitted fault, especially not in public. "I let my frustration blind me. That was ignorance, not justice. And you reminded me of the difference." Jasmine's expression didn't gloat. Instead, she nodded slowly, as if to say she heard the sincerity behind the words. "Apology accepted," she said simply. "But let's make it mean something. Come to my district this weekend. See the people you think don't belong here. Break bread with them. Look into their eyes and tell me they're not America." There was a long pause. Then Roberts, perhaps surprising even himself, said, "I will." That weekend, true to his word, Judge Roberts stood in a small community center in Dallas, serving plates of food beside Jasmine Crockett. He spoke to veterans, teachers, immigrants, and children. And though he never said it out loud, he realized something profound, that the measure of an American isn't where they came from, but how they love the place they stand. Months later, Roberts would mention that day in a speech about unity. Jasmine never bragged about it, never sought credit. She kept showing up for her people, because kindness wasn't her weapon, it was her way of living. And those who saw it knew. Sometimes the most powerful answer to hate is not more hate, but the unshakable truth that love belongs anywhere it dares to stand. If you want, I can also adapt this into a spoken word style script so it flows naturally for a 10 to 12 minute narration with pauses, emotional beats, and pacing that grips listeners. That would give it even more impact for an audience in the USA, UK, and Canada.